Coming update.
Okay, so mics are hot. That's right. It is July 24th. This is the next of. Sheet that's got me confused here. Oh, no, yeah, no, this is it. This is the next of board commissioner special meetings. This is really an interjurisdictional meeting to discuss the future of the fire department and the response to the mission CIT report. Thanks everyone for being here. I know that Mitch Houston should be walking in the door any moment, as should Police Judge Kelsey. So thanks everyone for coming. I think I'm just gonna hand it right off to our facilitator, Jonathan Barch.
Oh, do we need to do public comment?
Yes, we do need to do public comment.
One of us always remembers.
You.
One of us always remembers.
Sign them up.
All
My
right.
colleague Laura is also. Just got in that same.
That's funny.
So, yes, there was an accident that's preventing several people from being here in time.
That's why Lynette's not here.
If she's coming up the hill, that's why, yeah. So, I'm gonna go ahead and open it up for public comment. Is there anyone in the room who wishes to make public comment? Or anyone on Zoom, if you're on Zoom and you want to make a public comment, raise your hand, please. Not seeing anyone in the room. Is anybody online, maybe?
No, only person online is an AI note taker, so.
Seeing no public comment, I'm gonna close public comment. And now I'm gonna hand this to Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here again. Thanks for meeting in the afternoon. As I mentioned, my colleague Laura is coming here and she's caught in that accident. So our, Megan, did you get the extra?
I just checked and I did just get it, sorry. Got it 1 minute.
But you have an agenda in front of you. I think what we'll do today is we want to review the financial options, particularly in the light of the governance structures, specifically related to sustainability. What we want to sort of further discussion of financial sustainability in relationship to those governance options. And then I think the question is, what else do we need to talk about as a group? From when I started, it was, we want to look at all the options. We want to have the considerations related to the topics. We've been talking about governance. We've been talking about structure and finances and also the vision and sort of some of the values about this. And so the question would be, is there anything left to talk about before we could jump into what are these governance options? Laura, that we is there anything else that we need to talk about before we start evaluating which governance option to move forward with? And so I think that's the question, which is today is not necessarily getting into that, but I think moving toward what are we going to do? Like what else do we need to know? Is there more discussion? This group committed early on to say, look, we want to look at the range of options. We want to have time to discuss those. And we also want to make sure that we make a decision going forward about both the long term and then presumably if there's a change, assuming there's a change, there'll be some sort of a transition period. So what do we do in that? So that's kind of what we were thinking today.
Sorry, I could not figure out how to do that.
So that's what that says here. So financial sustainability, joint meeting outcomes, next slide. If you remember, we had this exercise, wasn't to rewrite the vision and values of the department, but for this group, what's our vision? What in sort of having safe communities through effective fire prevention, emergency response. Talked about some of those values around collaborative, accountable, representative governance in particular, innovative and proactive, prevention and emergency response, sustainable and sufficient funding. I think that's obviously the topic for today. Safe, professional, coordinated, volunteer and career staff, and an educated and engaged community of residents and visitors for risk reduction. And so we spent a bunch of time thinking about this. And I know there were some questions about why why are we spending any time talking about this? But I think as we get to evaluation, we want to be thinking about these in the context of this vision, values, and we are going to use the matrix that we were talking about before. And welcome, Laura. You were not the only one caught in that in the incident on I-70. So questions about what we're doing today? Good to be back here. Sorry, I missed the last couple of meetings. Does that sound right? Laura, anything on that? Okay, so next slide then. And Laura, I think if you want to summarize this.
Cool, thanks. And again, apologies for my late entry here. So this is just kind of a debrief of what we came to last time. We really talked a lot through financial options and how that differs under the different governance structures. We talked about it in kind of the context of that vision and those values, looking how each option created sufficiency, diversity in funding, equitable funding across both municipalities and the constituents within the county. And for the sufficient piece, it seems a ballot initiative to ensure increased funding is necessary under any organizational structure. So that's a next step in any case. With the diversity of funding, it's similar to policing's in any case. Mill levies and sales tax make up the majority of funding. Only the taxing body or mechanism kind of changes under the different organization structures. And lastly, on the equitable piece, the mill levies, we talked a lot about how mill levies place more responsibility on residents, while sales tax places a little more responsibility on visitors. And we didn't really hit that sustainability piece, so that's where we wanted to start today, is to talk about what is financial sustainability for fire prevention and response and emergency response. So that's kind of the big question we want to start with.
Yeah. Does that sound like the right question for today? And then again, I think what we wanted to do is then look at these issues of funding, governance, staffing, prevention and emergency response, community education, and risk reduction from the options, which including the sort of the status quo, no change to the IGA, if you will, modified fire authority, a special district, or an ESGID, and that's the basis upon which we were planning on sort of moving into the evaluation. But let me ask this question, and maybe it's better after we talk about financial sustainability. Are there other key topics that we want to make sure that this group discusses before we start to say, well, what do you think? And start to evaluate the sort of these options on this? Because again, when we started, you know, what I heard loud and clear, and Mitch, I didn't have conversations with you, obviously, but one of the things that I heard was just this is a big topic. It's a historic topic. It's something that let's take the time to look at all the options and have the discussion. And at the same time, note that there's the time ticking as well with an IGA expiring at the end of the year. And so, so I think that's the question for me coming back after having missed a couple of the meetings is that are there other things beyond the financial sustainability that you want to talk about before getting into your evaluation about what are we going to do, basically? So any thoughts on that? Anything else besides that comes to your mind that you've been thinking about, you've been talking with your partners, your constituents, your other elected officials or others that you want to make sure before we get, because that's the direction that we're headed in, and just want to make sure that there's not a topic, a stone unturned before, and then we'll get into the financial sustainability. Thoughts on that? Key things that would matter to you about making a choice, and we're trying for consensus, we're trying to build an agreement, and I'm not sure that that's necessary in terms of your ultimate decision-making authorities, but that's the goal of this effort. So anything else that's burning on your minds about before we start to evaluate, after we're going to talk about financial sustainability, but anything else just to put on the list?
I don't think this is a before we try to come to consensus in governance, but had a very encouraging meeting with the fire authority board. I think the fire authority is really close to being able to deliver some consensus from that board thoughts in response to the mission CIT work. So I think in a future agenda, it would be great to present on that. Here's the response, here's the staffing that we need, and the data that we have. I don't know if anybody else that's from the authority board wants to speak to that, but I'd love to see that on a future agenda as we get around to talking about what kind of mill rate we want to pursue, or what, you know, just what kind of revenues we think we need.
Okay, anybody else wanna? Because that really connects to the, you know, what's sufficient. In terms of sufficient, because it's connected directly to the level of service. Anybody else wanna talk about that? Who's part of the fire authority board? Wanna talk about that meeting? So that obviously was one of the elements in the mission CIT report, was in terms of response and staffing and you know, financial implications related to that. Summer days. Okay, so without hearing, thanks for that. We'll just make sure that I will have it on the next agenda. And Laura, should we jump into the financial sustainability question? So
I think one other thing is, what the way you asked that question just then was anybody at that meeting, fire authority members, and so they have any comment about that, they have comment about something separate, different from that meeting. And that is that you may recall at the last meeting, I expressed that I thought a 7-member board ultimately would be a better model, allow a little broader representation, a way to do it a little more surgically. Matt has worked up a couple of maps that divide the district into equal number or fairly equal numbers in a 5-member board of, and they took a shot at a 7-member board, but it didn't do exactly what I was talking about. So it didn't work out as being possible because the two of the towns are larger than the roughly 666 voters in a set that would be required as a 7-member board. And so he's got to go back to the drawing paper on that one. And the first one, the five district map was more or less gerrymandered to make sure they just had the right number of people. And because it was up around 915 on average, then Idaho Springs was close enough in terms of registered voters to be within the legal requirement for how equitable it needed to be. But when you get down to 666 per district, it doesn't work. So I had asked them to go back to the map that's some kind of division within the 2 largest towns or towns and allow them to separate out. Rationalizing that this is primarily, it's not for the purpose of function, it's for the purpose of finding board members and finding equitable representation. So dividing line inside a town isn't much different than other kinds of governance structures we have that have cities that have multiple, that are divided between 2 districts when you need to get equitable representation. So, but that's not ready for prime time yet. The other 2 commissioners haven't seen it yet. The only reason it was floated back by me was because I'd made the request and trying to have Matt do that. So you guys haven't seen it yet because they didn't accomplish what it was we really asked for yet. So at the next meeting, we could be ready to look at something that's germane that talks about Title 32 representation of what districts might look like.
Right. So that map was an effort to advance a discussion on a special district and how that would actually physically.
And how Title 32, Title 32 7 district board. So you can move to.
Right.
Thanks for doing nothing on that.
Anything else? I don't know. Well, let's jump into it. So the issue about financial sustainability is sort of, what does that mean in your mind? It came up in terms of our vision, or in our values about sustainable and sufficient funding. We just haven't talked a lot about the sustainability about that. Sufficient, assuming, I guess in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, but sufficient means being able to meet the response and staffing needs that have been outlined in the fire board authority in terms of the fire authority board in terms of that piece, and then how do you sustain that over time? Or do you have more you want to say about sustainability, Laura?
I think the way we framed it last time that we discussed was sufficient is there's enough funding to conduct emergency response and fire prevention. The equitable and diverse piece is you aren't putting all your eggs in one basket, and all the municipalities and unincorporated county space is represented in a way that is equitable. It's representative of the population, the leadership, all those things, the service that you're providing. And the sustainable piece we talked about as what keeps money in your reserves? What gives you the confidence to know that over 5 years, over 10 years, you won't have to come back to this table to have a discussion. So we wanted to talk more about that for each of kind of the governance options, but also start with what financial sustainability, what in the fire authority or could create that financial sustainability, what elements would really contribute to that.
Yeah, so I've got a flip chart, we're going low tech, and so we thought we'd just have a discussion on what that means to you. So again, this is sort of one of those elements of wanting to kind of work through, and we want to ensure that moving forward that there's not just sufficient, but it's sustainable. So what are the ideas, thoughts, strategies that you have for moving forward related to financial sustainability?
And last time we also talked about how the service needs change all the time. The breakdown of unincorporated to municipal calls to visitor calls versus resident calls, those things kind of change, but what doesn't change is the need to have the response funded and supported. So I think the mission CIT report kind of talked about it more in the service level, like those breakdowns, but this is maybe a higher level definition of sustainability over time.
Being a small county, how much can we really afford? You know, we can't really put a lot of mills on property owners. Yes, a visitor can help with sales tax, but that's where we're gonna have to come up with a budget that we can afford. It'd be nice to be like Denver or somebody like that, but.
I agree with John, you know, the path of least resistance really is sales tax. Large mill increases will be more difficult to swallow. But, you know, it's some combination of the two, but I really think we don't get there without a sales tax component.
So the definition of sustainability is having something beyond a mill levy.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I just want to throw it out there, like, we've already had Empire say that they can't go over 9. And with a sales tax component, we may not have to. But I just don't, on mills alone, there's not gonna be sufficient funding. And one thing we don't want to do is shortchange our fire authority.
so where you have the sort of equitable part, which is about, mill levy, talking about mill levies placing more responsibility on the resident, the sales tax place. So it's an element of equitable as well as equitable and sustainable. Yeah, at least in terms of how you define it. Go ahead, George.
If I could also
Yeah.
just throw in, what John was talking about, equitable. Some of these visitors, are on I-70 and, a lot of our response is due to that. Sales tax is just an opportunity for them to help us, with emergency response. I mean, I'm saying in my book, it's fair.
I would say, I agree. Georgetown has to be very sensitive because our sales tax is already high. And whereas I think Idaho Springs is lower than Georgetown's, so it does create a little bit of anxiety of the possibility of people not coming because it's higher. So they're not against it. I think our board is just leery.
And trust me, I fully get it. I just want you to know, we're 10.55. And we did a penny sales tax increase for water and sewer. So we had gone from 9.55 to 10.55. And I promise you, it didn't slow down at all. Visitors, I just don't think we have a lot of folks at checkout looking at that receipt and saying, well, I'm not coming back because they're 10.55. I know it could be a very sensitive subject, but we just didn't see it when we had that penny increase.
So we talked about kind of the limits of a mill levy in terms of that piece, but there's also implications related to the sales tax and the implication and the impact on visitation. What else around sustainability?
I mean, just like a look at the tax base itself, I mean, it's right now, we're sort of framing this in terms of sales tax versus property tax. And within that frame, we should be aware that the statewide property tax system is, we don't know what an assessment rate is gonna look like year to year. We don't know what kinds of ballot measures are gonna greatly impact our property tax bases. And we can talk about that in the short term with, if Initiative 108 passes, it's gonna cost the county like $1.1 million a year. But over the long run, it's a statewide system that's subject to legislative tinkering and dark money ballot measures, et cetera. Sales tax seems to not be.
It's not predictable. It's not predictable right now.
Uncertainty, lack of predictability.
With the property tax, that's
Property
because
tax.
there's other influences.
Yeah, so how does that relate, George, then to
When I-
sustainability, like what's?
When I think about sustainability, I think we come out of this room, we say, yeah, 12 mils is gonna do it, 12 mils might not be 3 years from now or 10 years from now when a legislature decides that assessment rates need to be lower.
Yep. Thursday.
So we've heard from Idaho Springs, the county, and Georgetown. Doesn't look like.
Fire.
She's online.
Oh, good. Oh, okay.
Virtual Wendy.
Well, and we're in the same boat. I think our sales tax is 10.55. Our board has already said, wow, is there any way to lower our taxes? No, sorry, there's probably not. And we're looking at raising them. But what other choice do we have? I agree, property tax is not the way to go. So there's not a whole lot of new information to add. We agree.
I tend to agree with Chuck. I think I think that's a consumer standpoint. I pay a lot of attention to the bill and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe what it cost me to buy stuff. I don't recall ever looking at the sales tax and going, that's done. It's some good premier issue. And I don't know, some other people may. But when you look at sales tax differences between maybe in the next, you're looking at the difference between 8 or 9 and 10 or 11 up in that range, and so that incremental difference on your bill, that couple of percent isn't really what's driving the bill.
And it may not affect visitors driving through as much as what I've heard is residents who will say, I'm driving down the mountain and making my big purchases because I can't afford to have it delivered to my house in Empire because our tax rate is higher than some of the other places I can go and buy stuff. All right, that's your prerogative, but that's what people in Empire are noticing because of our sales tax rate. I have not heard visitors say, oh my gosh, it's so expensive, I'm never coming back. That's not what we're hearing. I'm hearing locals say, we're making changes because it's really hard. We're trying to pinch pennies anywhere we can.
And I would agree, George sounds the same way. I've not heard that either, but I've heard business owners concerned by that. And, even, and we listen, our Business Promotion Commission listens to our businesses, and to hear the knee-jerk reaction, but I too have not heard a visitor complain about the taxes.
But that's sort of the idea about there's an impact of an increased sales tax on residents. And we've talked about the visitors, but also as residents. And, I don't think at least what I've heard in this discussion is that it's a combination, right? So it's not, mill levies or sales tax. It's, if I'm understanding this, that the structure that provides the opportunity for both of those. And that is that there's some legitimate questions about how much and what's the service that you get for that, and how's that impact visitation, how does it impact residents, those kind of things. That's sort of the balancing act, and I think hopefully there'll be some information that comes out of the survey, right, or at some point in time around that. So what else sort of, is there anything else that we need to talk about in terms of this? And I want you to be thinking about it in the context of the governance options, because that's where we're headed next.
I was just gonna say, I think pulling it back to so mill levies and sales tax can occur pretty much in any of the structures, but are there mechanisms under any of the structures that lend themselves to a sales tax that would contribute to financial sustainability? Or it doesn't really sound like I'm not hearing interest in the mill levy route of raising mill levies, but I'm wondering if there's ways that one structure, like the Title 32 special district versus how the fire authority currently runs versus the SGID. Is there a way that the funding would be more consistent, more straightforward, more predictable over 5 years versus if you're thinking about sustainability kind of in that longer term increment?
I think the crucial question to evaluate these different models along the lines of sustainability is who needs to continue to be happy and agree for those revenues to contribute. We're here at this table because underneath the IGA model, it's 5 jurisdictions. Under a Title 32, if these jurisdictions, and this is a pro and a con, right? These 5 jurisdictions approve a service plan and get a tax increase passed for a Title 32. Cat's out of the bag. That's a separate government. Nobody can say that I'm mad at it, I'm closing it down. Nobody's going to close down the fire authority under the IGA either, like practically speaking. But under a Title 32 would be practically impossible, or technically impossible, is what I'm going to say. To say this money isn't going to this organization.
All 3 models are restricted to property tax with the number of the and then the potential for a sales tax. The fire authority model allows for a little bit more flexibility for additional the municipalities' flexibility on how they can assess fees, the other tax potential. Title 32 is no levy, property tax, and sales tax only. And then service fees that don't really add up to much more than covering fuel costs. It would be the same for the ESD because that's a no levy. It would be restricted to being able to set sales tax.
And remind me, the general fund contribution from each municipality is reviewed annually? Is that the current cadence under the IGA?
It's under the IGA and it's equivalent to the mill levy of the ESD. Actually, the ESD pays in a little less because they reach the administrative fees, treasurer fees.
So. More?
So the main difference is just who is collecting the sales tax. One of them, the municipalities would have their own tax, the other one, the second one, the Title 32, it's its own special district collecting the tax. The third one is a countywide tax. Still the same sales tax, but it depends on who's putting it out there and who's collecting it. Is that really truly the only difference between them as far as
And
the structure?
within that, I guess, to your point, the flexibility of those, where those funds go. So if it's through the county or through the municipalities, there's boards and things.
Allocate them from.
Responsibility then shifts also, right?
What's that?
Responsibility shifts. It's no longer the responsibility of the municipality to fund it. It's Title 32 board's responsibility to fund fire service. So you're also shifting that.
The county could put a ballot issue out to do a countywide tax that would be specific to fire service. And it doesn't have to be under the direction of the commissioners or the ESD. It would be I guess it would be ultimately under the commissioners for that structure, because that's what the ambulance tax is. It's under that structure somewhat.
Just depends. But I agree with you, and I think the points about the non-special district options would allow the municipalities flexibility instead of the municipalities have some tools that are not property or sales limits. That they could throw in whether they're contracting with the county for services or contracting IPA for services. But I mean, flexibility, that sounds like adequacy and ability to make a revenue stream adequate. When I think about sustainability, and it's important, when I think about sustainability, it really goes back to what does it look like when you realize you need new revenue? How many people do you have to convince? What are the other things they're weighing in their heads, right? An elected type fire department board has one mission. And if they think they need more taxes, you're probably gonna go ask. I mean, that's why what we see of other Title 32s. When we decide we need more money under either the IGA or the county system, it's a multi-jurisdictional conversation.
It is nice though to have that flexibility, because even like Silver Plume, our sales tax isn't gonna be anywhere, anything, we don't have that. But we already went up to 9 mils on our property tax to help our contribution. So to have that flexibility where sales taxes can be with Idaho Springs at that point, where we can actually set our own budget of what we need to be paying in. We're gonna be doing the 9 mils, because we just raised ours to 9 mils in April without even a hiccup on it. Everybody, there was no negative votes to it or anything. So I like the flexibility a lot more.
Peter, I saw you come off of mute. Did you want to add something on here on the Zoom? Or the?
No, I was just curious when Kelly had mentioned that the county could pass a tax to support fire. I wasn't sure what he was referring to. Then I decided he must have presumed it, it must have been the public safety tax is what he's talking about.
Yes.
But of course, a public safety tax would not be limited, most likely to just fire. That was it.
Thanks.
Big question with that sales tax would be what's the formula to separate Evergreen Fire District out of the fire authority jurisdiction.
So that's an issue we need to cross if we were to move in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how do you separate those? Peter, did you want to weigh in on that one too?
No, it's, I mean, I think that's a completely separate issue, and that's presuming that the county would choose to adopt a public safety tax, how that would look. I mean, I think that's a little far off.
Yeah.
When we consider the fact that we've had, for example, a road and bridge tax, we worked with the cities, the municipalities rather, to give back a portion of that to account for certain things. And whether that would be viable in this, in terms of the boundaries of the current fire authority, in terms of bringing in sales tax, for example, or public safety tax, I'm not sure if that would. So I hesitate to say that there should be an assumption that the county could pursue a public safety tax in order to solve the situation. I think a Title 32 is a more viable solution now as far as the sales tax goes, because that would cover the entire district equally.
That district would still look the same because of Evergreen's district. That won't change.
Peter, is Evergreen out of the ambulance tax?
No.
That's what I thought.
No, Evergreen pays the ambulance tax, and there's no distinction. So that's why I believe one of the issues that has been raised is whether or not, how would the residents of our eastern part of our county feel supporting a fire protection district that they don't
belong to.
So,
I think the question was directed toward Mitch, at least by Randy here. By notion here that we're beginning to start to use this to evaluate the governance options, which I think is, is kind of, it sounds like where your head is at on this. Really kind of weighing the trade-offs between this, but let's just make sure we've got the whole sustainability sort of question. Some of it has to do with who's, what does it look like when there needs to be more money? Who needs to support that? What's the, looking at the impact of sales tax on residents, on visitors, with this uncertainty of the policy in the policy arena, the statewide property tax, that lack of predictability, sort of the notion around particularly beyond mill levies in terms of looking at having that as a source of funding. Flexibility, I think, as Chris talks about this from a municipal perspective. The sort of some of the evaluation is that, sort of the Title 32 sales tax would cover the entire district. What did I miss, Laura?
It's my understanding that if the ballot question calls for a countywide tax, that would cover the same boundaries as a Title 32 sales tax would. Depends on how you word the question as to what that tax covers.
Peter question.
Please correct. Maybe just answer that. I think I know the answer.
That was an opinion I got from our attorney, Bob Cole.
So could you repeat the question for me?
That our attorney, Bob Cole, is in the impression that the ballot question would establish a county-wide sales tax for fire service that would cover the entire jurisdiction of the response area, the same as it would if it were a Title 32 sales tax.
So a county sales tax that would exclude the Evergreen Fire Protection District.
It'd just be a county-wide, not a county tax, but a county-wide that includes the municipalities.
But excludes
Evergreen.
Evergreen.
Yeah.
Excludes Evergreen? Is that
Yeah,
correct?
Yeah.
that is not legal under the current statutes, there's no ability to cut out a portion of the county to a countywide sales tax.
I'm sure they would appreciate getting some sales tax as well then. And that could be, I don't know how you figure that out, but the only other option is to
allocate that.
have the 4 municipalities do their own sales tax. And I did some preliminary numbers on that, but I didn't know how to divide that Evergreen District numbers out of there.
Kelly, why don't we hold on to that for the time being, because I think we can get into some of the more specific things when we finish this question about, is there, and I'm sorry to keep bugging you for this, but is there anything more about sustainability in terms of thinking about funding it? We'll get into the evaluation of those options here and really, I think where your head is in terms of trying to weigh those sort of these options, but is there anything else?
I just have one more prompting question for the group, just out of curiosity. The flexibility within a non-special district sales tax where the municipalities are coming to an agreement, do you think that is reflective of the flexibility or change in demand for fire prevention and emergency response? Over time, are you seeing changes in demand for these services? And I just want to make sure if you were seeing an increased demand, you would want flexibility for an increase in funding. But if you're seeing an increase in demand, you don't want the flexibility for a decrease in funding. Does that kind of?
The increase in demand is hugely based on the medical response component. And that keeps going up. The rest of the stuff stays fairly flat. You know, we have more truck fires than normal, but we also have less fire wrecks than we used to have. So that stuff all kind of floats in there, but the medical component, which includes rescue and includes the car wrecks. Jeremy's got a tighter grasp on those numbers because he works the data. But the increase in service will keep going up because there's just more people that keep coming in. Like somebody let the mice out. And the funding. And one thing, to go backwards a little bit, one thing that funding component doesn't look at is the sustainability of the wages that we currently pay the people we have. And that factors into retention and recruitment big time. So if we go to a 9 mils and we still need to have at least a 0.5% sales tax from this municipal group to even just do wage increase and cover increased costs of response and part of that deficit spending we're doing.
And I have to ask that 0.5 sales tax increase, were you coming up with about $1.1 million in additional funds with 0.5 cent?
That would include the county.
Okay.
I'm looking at 635 based on last year for the municipal.
All right.
So for 4 municipalities, that's all 4 municipalities.
Yeah.
I think the question that has been going through my mind as we talk through the sustainability is it's a balance of what is the actual need, the demand from the community, and then the other side is what is the burden that they can bear. Because there's got to be there's a ceiling. You can only go so far, and then which one dictates the other? Like we can say we need this, however, we can't sustain this. That it's almost like what's the ceiling, and should we then be backing down? But what can we afford to provide for our services despite what the need is. You know, it's like, there's gotta be a point where you're like, we can't go any higher than this. I mean, like when you were talking about 12 mils, 15 mils, 20 mils, and then people were like, I'm done. Cause I think that's the part that I keep sort of in my mind of like, at some point, it is not sustainable. Like we're gonna have to live within a means and that's it. So anyways, that's just my thought as I've been processing this.
But I think, isn't that part of the sort of the role of the community survey associated with that? Brian, can you, I know we
Yeah,
had.
we've only had one meeting, so we don't have much yet to report back out on, but yeah, I mean, there's gonna be some questions about expectations of service, but we have to meet the demand. There's no option not to meet the demand, right? I mean, the demand is what the demand is. I mean, Aaron's team's not gonna stop and Jeremy and Kelly's teams are not gonna stop responding, right? We have to meet the demand unless we have some way to change that number and bring that number down.
On the question about traffic, I'm curious, I've been trying to think about my response to like, what would we expect those increases to continue or not? And I think about the Floyd Hill project and the traffic that it's about to unleash on this corridor, that's finished, and that's 5 years out. I think we can expect them to continue to increase, but I bet, Jeremy, you think about this a lot.
Well, if you look at what we're seeing, we used to average like 30,000 cars a day on I-70. And that's, for years, it was like this flat average. And during those periods of time, we were running about 1,150 calls a year, which now looking back was awesome. Then we bumped to 33,000 cars a day during like 2021, 22. We're currently sitting at 35,000 cars a day, with surge up to 50,000 cars a day during holiday and peak periods. We've never seen that. And the numbers keep going up. We went from 1,150 calls a year to we're pushing probably over 1,700 this year. So those keep going up year over year, and all the data shows it. And to Brian's point is exactly it. We have always tried to meet the rising demand. Medicals are up, which makes sense. Our 65 portion of our community increases every year. Look at the census data, it's like, well, why are medicals up? Because our at-risk population is growing. Right, so we know this. So I think that the thing we're talking about here is sustainability is what do we do beyond 2036 when Henderson shuts down? How do we get to something? We were going through the 1988 exemptions where we exempted a bunch of properties, public service being one of them. For those who don't know that. Zero taxes for public service. We respond to all of their facilities essentially for free unless we get billing recovery. So what does this look like moving forward? And I think this is kind of my crux of this whole thing, not to pick on the municipal partners, but we have in municipalities historically, property owners in the municipal boundaries haven't paid a fire property tax ever. So we've got people in the community going, I don't want to pay tax. Well, don't worry, you haven't paid it for 150 years. Why should you start today? So there's some hard conversations that need to happen beyond making everybody warm and fuzzy, because everybody wants 8-minute or less response to the entire community. We're 11 minutes to that on average everywhere in the community right now, which is better than like 23 where we started. They want this level of service. Okay, let's meet the level of service we're trying to do. But with that comes a cost, and we need to have some hard conversations with the people that live in our municipal boundaries, especially that have never had a line item on their tax bill that says fire protection ever. It's been paid by visitors. It's been paid by their property, portion of their property tax. Right, it's been allocated by the municipal governments very effectively, but they've never actually paid. I pay $150 for fire protection. Nobody can say that because they've never done it besides Plume. So I think it's time to have some really hard conversations beyond what we've done for 150 years. I'm not one of the tradition, but we're beyond that stage. We're about 5 years beyond that conversation, in my opinion. I say that because I'm 4 years in this job and writing this, but
So I think the big question for tonight beyond sustainability is what does the governance structure need to look like? This is the meeting was productive. I'll talk about the meeting. The meeting was productive for the fire authority, but I had a small come apart. And this I'll say to the group. I feel like we're sitting in a really nice tour bus on blocks as a group. We're 5 meetings in. We haven't moved a single foot forward beyond, we're no longer throwing rocks, quit hitting each other with sticks. We're still saying names, but that's getting a little bit better. But we haven't actually left the parking spot and this is 5 meetings. We gotta leave the parking spot. We set out on this. We have an advanced timeline. We're gonna meet every 2 weeks and we're gonna be really productive, and we have not been productive. Besides the fact that we're civil, which is totally awesome. So we have to get off the blocks. We have to get this moving down a path, whatever path that is. And I told George this. If everybody in the room gets 66% of what they want, that's a bit greater than average win. But right now, we're kind of swirling in the pool going, well, we like each other today. That's awesome. I think we're gonna have to make some people upset. We're gonna have some hard conversations in this room, starting probably right now. And figure out what the governance is. If it's not going to the county, then say it. If it's between Title 32 and staying a modified fire authority, fine, say it. And then figure out who's on which side of the fence. Throw the last 4 rocks you have in your pocket. Whoever wins the rock fight is the direction we move forward. So we can have some real conversations of, here's the structure that 66% of the people can agree on. And this is how we fund the thing.
Yeah. You know, and I do think that so that's a definition of leaving parking lot. And that when we started, we wanted to make sure that we had the conversations. If Megan, if you could put the slide up, and maybe this moves us in that direction, which is now thinking about, I love the idea about moving the parking lot. So, you know, kind of what do we asked before, what other conversations need to happen? So the next slide, next 2 slides. So you want to explain kind of this real quickly, and then I think what we want to do is start to have the conversations. I heard, like, you know, from you, Jeremy, that, you know, we talked about equitable in the context of mill levies on residents versus visitors. I think what you're talking about is equitable in terms of municipal contribution, if I'm understanding that. And so let's begin to have that conversation. You know, it feels like it's time. And so here we are, the values and the options. And why don't you just walk through what we have here, and then going to ask you kind of for your input about, you know, not sort of information, but based on the information that you have to date, which way are you leaning and why? Why, you know, what's your thinking? And if nothing, whatever is like that proverb, which is like you make progress by closing doors, that maybe that's our first step, which is that we take some of these off the table and start to focus in on those pieces. So, Laura, want to explain sort of what's up there?
Sure. This is really an abbreviated version of kind of how we agreed to look. And to Jeremy's point, move forward with making a decision about where this structure is going. So Jeremy, thank you. I think it's a good reminder that time is of the essence. And I think in June, we talked a lot about governance and what that kind of representation means to everybody in this room, what the expectations are about leadership, what you value in a governance structure. And
Wendy can't get unmuted. She's trying to participate, and so she was calling. I apologize for the interruption, but she's struggling to unmute, and she can't do it.
I can ask her to
So
unmute.
sorry.
I'll ask her.
She called because she can't seem to get the unmute off. She's trying to participate and can't, so that's why she called. So I apologize.
no, that's okay. We want to make sure we can. Yeah.
She's a panelist.
Hey!
Welcome to the party, Wendy.
I've been here all along.
We're glad to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead. I apologize for interrupting, but
if we're gonna start contributing, I couldn't do so.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Last time we talked about funding, where the funding really comes from, how to get sufficient, we got to sustainability today. We came to some agreements and really got a lot of things on the table that ended up kind of addressing some of these other values as well. So staffing, prevention, emergency response, and community education and risk reduction. So I think Jonathan's initial question was, what else do we have to lay out to talk about these options? And then once we're ready to talk about these options, the first question really is, are any of these not meeting these values?
You want to, yeah, I mean, so let's just start there. And if there are things that come up additionally, we'll come back at them. It's not closing the door on this, but let's, here's another proverb or saying, you talk and you talk and you talk, and at some point the real talk begins. Like, what are we gonna do? So here we are, which is that I'd like each one of you to think about these options in the context of the values and the discussions that we've had thus far. And I'd like to know kind of if there is one of these options that you think, or more of those options that you can eliminate that don't meet these values, and where you're leaning in terms of just, and the answer of why. What's from these discussions, there's a lot that's happened in these last 5 meetings. I mean, there's a lot of, there's a lot of, challenging things. There's a context that we're working in. So I think that's the transition here. If there's more information that needs to be shared, we can always back up to that, but take a minute, take 30 seconds to kind of really think about some of the discussions. What's something that we say, just doesn't meet what the values that we've talked about, with these governance options. Which one where are you leaning and why? And let's just start having that discussion with that. So take a minute.
I don't mind kicking this off. For me, 2 of these are easy to cross off. The status quo is ridiculous.
Why?
Because
say it. I'm gonna ask you obvious questions again. These are obvious.
And I realize we need a lot of outreach to the public because most are not aware of the jeopardy that they're in. But the status quo is only paying about 1/3, some may say 1/4 of the money that it takes to adequately fund. So that one's an easy one to cross off. The last one for me is the ESGID, and it's just because I don't think that it meets the political reality. I don't think that you would have enough buy-in amongst the parties to get that going. I would need council buy-in, of course. And I think it's much easier pill to swallow if we're either a modified fire authority or a Title 32. And I am thankful to our fire chief for pointing out all the various steps and additional time it would take to create that.
A special district.
Yes.
Yep.
Or like I'm saying, I could also see council going with a modified fire authority.
Thanks for kicking us off, Chuck. So status quo, just, from a financial standpoint, obviously you're eating into your reserves currently. It's not the end service levels, it's not sufficient. The ESGID, you talked about sort of the political or policy support there's not enough buy-in associated with that. What do others think?
Jumping fire. Ours is pretty simple representation. We're small, we know that, but we appreciate having representation. We would probably fall in the modified fire authority category because that can allow for a bigger board. Municipalities can have their representation specifically, it could even be bigger than it is now if we're missing some areas. But representation is pretty important. And it seems like we have the ability to have sales tax in the modified fire authority, the special district, and the ESGID. So as I've learned more about it, it feels like we have really good options in all three for that funding. But if we can have that funding in the modified fire authority and it keeps better representation, and that also gives more flexibility, that helps Empire. So I would say that's where we lean, that would be our choice. I agree, status quo is off the table. So I would say that is our top choice if we were voting today.
And and for
And
clarity,
just to remind us, we're not voting today.
I know.
What we want to
I
do is.
had to decide today, that's what I would say we've talked about. Yeah, and I don't want to speak for Wendy specifically, but that's what we as a group have talked about. That's what we would.
I have a clarifying question and then a follow-up question. Clarifying, you mean flexibility in allocation of funding specifically? Okay. And my follow-up question is, is this the only structure that you see a representative board and flexibility funding allocation precedent?
It's the best one for what we see as the representation we would like to have. And probably Title 32 would be next, because at least that's elected. So there's a chance someone from the Empire area would be on that board.
Yeah.
So.
What about the status quo?
That doesn't work.
And then for the same reasons, no, the representation and the flexibility in funding allocation, or is it similar to Idaho Springs?
Mainly the funding, that's the problem
It's
we're
not
trying to
sufficient.
solve, and
Yep.
that one does not solve the problem, so, yeah.
How about Georgetown?
I say something real quick about status quo versus modified, which hasn't really been defined other than suggesting that the unincorporated area needs more representation. The status quo, from my viewpoint, the only thing that's a problem with status quo is the financing. The actual structure and how it works and how effective we are at providing service is not negative right now. And we need more money, plain and simple. I just want to throw that out because there's so far two of you have said status quo, no, that's not good. So I wanted to clarify that. The status quo needs financing.
And so we
I
talked.
didn't see anything in the study that said, oh my God, the governance structure is totally out of control and it needs fixed. There was some opinions in there, but there's nothing to quantify what the lack of governance is within the story.
I thought we were sort of beyond mill levies. With the existing status quo, are we not stuck with mill levies?
No.
You can do sales tax on any of these? Is that?
Sure.
From a municipality.
So I think the way to frame this is, if we call status quo as we sit today, mill levy, municipal contributions, as we stand today, no sales tax. I think that's where modified fire authority calls into, what would we change out of our current structure today? And what would it look like becomes the modified fire authority?
Thank you, Jim.
I think it's the way to clarify this. If we think status quo as we are today is terrible, I think we all agree with that. Great, kick it off the list. And we say modified, we require these 12 things to occur to make it functional. Then we get to that point, we lay out 12 things that have to make that functional. Because there's probably a few things that come in on that.
Yeah.
And then we have Title 32 and we have ESQ.
Thank you.
I think that's helpful, and I think just for the modified fire authority, just so that we're kind of being clear about that, which is that could include an increased number of members and also a additional beyond sales tax or beyond mill levy. Okay.
Just to be clear, our assumption was that meant without increasing any kind of funding. And clearly that's not gonna work. So that was our assumption of what status quo meant. So,
That's why.
yeah, I appreciate you making that
He says smarter
clarification.
things.
Yeah, we reached a lot of agreements earlier, one that you need more money. That was an easy one. Chris?
Honestly, the way some leading status quo is needs funding, so I'm not against it. I believe that our service levels and I believe our governance structure and I believe our fire authority itself is a phenomenal situation right now. I think the only thing that it's lacking is funding. And this group could come together and figure out a proper way to fund it. Like Jeremy said earlier, nobody in the municipalities made a proper fire authority tax. We did it. We passed it in April. We're done. We're at 9 mils and we're willing to go more even on a sales tax realm right now to keep our seat at the table. So yes, we want to make sure if it was between all 4 of these right now, we are looking at it, it'd be status quo and modified fire authority. If there needs to be more representation on the board, I don't think that's a bad thing. And right now our fire authority is set up for it. ESD can have another seat on the board if they want to come sit on another seat. I've been on this board for 10 years. I know I'm young, but I've been on this board for 10 years and I've never seen 2 people sitting on that seat ever. Back me up on that ever. There's never been 2 representatives there for ESD in 10 years that I've been there. So I believe that if the modified fire authority is something someone's leaning towards, then I think status quo works just fine because just looking at funding at that point. If I had to rule one out, I would rule out ESGID just because I believe that it's completely rebuilding a department and it's going to take so much more than just changing a governance structure and a funding situation. You're completely rebuilding a fire department with that situation. And I think that should be off the table, really, in my mind.
Which one?
That's ESGID. So that's, for you, it's about effort and the complication associated with the retooling or rebuilding the fire department and all that sort of mechanics associated with that.
That's a lot more money. Why are we gonna throw more money at something that's obviously working really well? Our response times aren't horrible. I don't know why everybody keeps saying that. We've got phenomenal response times in this fire authority. We have data to back it up. So that's our mind. That's where Silver Plume's coming from. If we were gonna vote today, we'd be going status quo, whatever you would call it, and looking for a better funding option for everybody across the board to be paying more and same.
County folks.
Georgetown too.
Oh, sorry.
I know, it was like, okay.
No, we're popcorning this. This is not just municipal in the county, so, sorry, go ahead.
No offense. Just kidding. I think, I'm glad you clarified the first option because I was like, I thought the first option was still an option that we can still modify and make it better because I don't think to throw out the first option was legit in my mind. I think it still has a lot of room to improve. But if we go back and go, yeah, of course it's not meeting, that's why we're all here, because it's not meeting the current needs, but I do think we can adjust it. The second one, absolutely. I think the first 2 are legitimate. The third one, I'm a little bit more or less, it just falls a little bit less. It's still an option for us when it comes down to the, Georgetown's not gonna walk away from that. I just think it's the representative model that our municipalities have direct control over who they appoint. And I think that's the preferred model. And it works. And we have great communication between it. We don't feel like it's 2 different entities. There's no authority that goes past them. No, it's a good model that works. I think the last one, the ESGID, I think it's the same what we've been hearing. I think it's the one that's gonna be the hardest to push through because of politics. I think the politics in our communities are pretty high and it is gonna retool the whole thing. And I just think we've lost a lot of time already. And we have, it has a lot to impact. I think the first 2 are I would communicate from my perspective as an administrator that would be the preference. So I can't speak to others. I can't even speak to my whole board because we haven't discussed this, but
Yeah.
My understanding of where I'm at, I would say that's my personal view.
To add to that,
Yeah.
yeah. I would agree. I think it was, the status quo the only thing that I see really non-functional is the funding.
Yeah.
I am definitely in favor of modifying the fire authority, the existing fire authority to adjust representation. And I'm also, I'm not as leery of trying to propose mill levies. I admire Silver Plume for taking that step. I think if you go at it right and you can build the case for your citizens that in order to have the response that you guys need and expect, this is what it's gonna be. But if we blend it with, let's figure in a sales tax piece, safety tax piece that allows our visitors to help contribute, I think you'll get more buy-in from your citizens. So I guess the optimal option for me is the modified fire authority. And I think those that option is probably what we need to push our energies toward in the short term, because our existing IGA expires the end of the year and there's not time to do Title 32. It just takes too much time to set that up. Title 32 is, I think, still an option that's on the table, because it still allows representation by all the partners. But logistically, we don't have the time to get it going and actually up and off the ground. So it's a future possibility, and I don't care for the ESGID option because the voices from the municipalities are quieted. They're no longer an actual voice. They are just advisory, and I'm not a fan of that option. So.
Okay, can I jump in here?
Sure, Wendy. And then.
Okay, I'll make it quick. I would like to say that I think Jeanette very accurately stated our feelings. The status quo will not work if we cannot add to the funding and possibly widen the representation, which then leads us to the modified fire. Title 32 is going to take an awful lot of work and time that we don't have. We have already been squeezed into a pinch point when things got down to the wire, which is why we have asked for the time to renew the existing IGA and actually come to a better point, which I can see that we are doing tonight. As far as the ESGID, I don't think we have the support. I know we don't, but I don't think across the board in the county you're going to have the support for it. And I don't believe that it will properly represent the rest of us. So we are, number one would be modified, and if desperate, number two would be special district.
Okay, thank you. For the county, I'll just start by just saying that we don't have a position as a board. What we do have is the board here. And so what you're gonna hear is our kind of real time individual thoughts, right?
Right, and again, we're not voting, we're not doing this. This is an effort to, what'd you call it, get off the starting line or starting block? What do we call that?
Out of the parking lot.
Out of the park.
Move the bus.
Yay!
It's a work session. So, I mean, that said, I don't have to jump out with my opinion first. I would defer to one of you.
Could I just clarify really quickly? I heard Rick mention that the status quo could work for Georgetown with some changes, and then Lynette, you
Well,
provide the funding.
if you're talking changes, then why wouldn't you leap to the modified? I mean,
I think
if status quo means,
I think the question, for me at least, the distinction here is board as is. Board is Does that?
I think that's fair. It's a everybody knows what we funding no matter what we do.
Yeah,
That particular idea is that it expands representation for some areas of the,
yeah,
particularly areas of the unincorporated county that are municipal, that are concentrations almost like the municipalities that don't have a voice for their area.
Yeah, that's fair.
okay, great. And so I just wanted to ask Rick, was there anything outside of funding that you were saying, like in the status quo?
No, and I think I appreciate the clarification, but
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think having the first one is a little, I think everyone's looking at,
Yeah.
it's really the modified, because that's where all the changes are gonna come. Nobody, we can't exist with status quo. That's why we're all here.
George,
Right.
George.
Right. So,
Mitch.
new guy will go first.
Okay.
It's got to be the embarrassed one. I always assumed that to get us into January, that we would have a continuation of the fire authority. But I didn't see that precludes this group of people deciding that, say, a special district is ultimately the direction that they want to go. I agree, ESGID, I don't have a taste for that. I don't think that makes sense. I think, though, that a special district could more effectively respond to the future needs of a fire district. I think they could more quickly modify course. They might be more responsive to capital needs like improvements or new fire stations, capital equipment and things like that. That's where I live and why.
So the idea of sort of a couple of things. One is that there's going to be a time extension, and it's not that just sort of there'll be a longer term vision and then a transition to a special district, for example. It doesn't-
If that's
it's-
what
we're not
the board decides
excluding,
upon.
it's not like in your mind, you wouldn't be excluding a special district because it's gonna take 2-3 years to get there. It's just what would happen in the interim, and that would, in your mind, would be a modified.
And I could see a modified fire authority contemplating in their agreement that move forward at 32, for example, if that's what the group went for.
Okay. Yeah. Cutting to the chase pretty quickly, I would eliminate status quo in ESGID. The reasons for that are that the ESGID has a lot of political problems, and I even have a political problem with it. I'm a county commissioner, of course I want all the power and authority, just like everybody in this room. And I think that 3 people making those decisions at the end of the day are an unlikely thing to sell, no matter how good the people are at making those decisions and how happy they make you making them. This conversation about, we'll spend the next 30 years talking about when the county commissioners stole the power and authority away from, fire, regardless of how good a job they do. It's almost irrelevant. I think the status quo doesn't work without the representation and the funding, and so what we're talking about modified is exactly what Kelly's talking about, is we need more money. And I think what's fair on the board is that we have representation of some high concentrations of population in the county that are changing at this time. And I don't think Title 32, I'm not very receptive to the fact that we don't have time for Title 32. Trust me, to try to find the funding opportunities on the modified fire authority isn't going to be easy either. That's not gonna happen. I don't think it's gonna happen any faster, any more easily at the end of the day. And we might find out at the end that there is a little more space and a little more room within the Title 32 to do that. So, and I also think, and I thought this all along, almost exactly what Mitch said, and I've stated it a few times in the past, is that we can build a new IGA that can reflect what the Title 32 looks like in terms of its structure and its representation. If we think about that, the size of board or something like that, we can find a way to do that. We can sign a new IGA with the idea of moving towards a Title 32. I haven't landed on whether a modified fire authority or a Title 32 is the right thing. I tend towards a Title 32. I think a fresh start's good, and I think we can get there. I think if we do go to a Title 32, it's got to be the maximum size board to make people feel like they're well represented in the county based on the maps I've looked at so far. And we'll have a better chance to look at those maps in another week or so. With regard to something that both George and Jeremy brought up, and I appreciate it. Right now, for about the last, despite the increases in traffic for about the last 5 years, for the last 5 or 6 years since we've got the peak period shoulder lanes partially and then fully in operation, we haven't seen the frontage roads full. We haven't seen the towns gridlocked as much as, except for a little bit during the COVID crush when that came. And the reason for that is that Floyd Hill has been the governor. It's been the qualifier at the top of the mountain bike run or something, or the dirt bike run. It's the one part that's the hardest that you put right at the beginning that nobody can get past. There aren't very many people that get past it and go down. That traffic jam and the increased capacity of the peak period shoulder lanes has allowed the county, it's kind of numbed us because it's allowed the county to run more. From the twin tunnels to the west, we've flowed a lot better, at least westbound in the last few years. In 2028, only 4 years from now, when they cut the last ribbon on Floyd Hill, I'm afraid that giant traffic jam that you see westbound from Floyd Hill all the way sometimes to 470, but usually to Genesee on the peak days, which run about 50,000, over 50,000 cars a day. That's measured at the Eisenhower Tunnel. The Veterans Memorial tunnels have higher counts because some of the people that come through the tunnel actually bleed off over the other passes. So we have a lot more people here than we even realize. And it's going to go, and that traffic jam is going to move into Clear Creek County because it's going to flow through Floyd Hill now, past that 3 to 2 that backs it up, 3-lane drop to 2-lane. And it's going to be and the argument's going to be between Georgetown Hill and Empire Junction over which one we think is causing it. The answer is both. And we're going to turn back into a parking lot here. And that's going to have a big impact on our calls, fire and ambulance both. That's my belief. And so we do need to get something done, but I think we have time to do a Title 32. But we've got to do a version of a modified fire authority to even move towards a flat Title 32 because they're both the same process to make a bunch of money if we can and to find a model that everybody's happy with for representation.
Randy, thanks for that. Can you just say just a touch more about this idea about a fresh start of Title 32 and kind of what you're thinking about there? Is it more given sort of Floyd Hill and the transportation sort of moving of those bottlenecks, if you will, with presumably with the completion of Floyd Hill, is Title 32 is that in response to the increased calls? Is that more responsive? Is that what that means?
I think for me, the Title 32 means that although we've said that every one of these structures can employ both property tax and sales tax, I'm not convinced that the modified, and maybe Peter can weigh in on this and give us some advice. My feeling was that the modified fire authority, either the status quo or modified fire authority was a little more restricted in its ability to do that. Yes, it can be done, but how much it can do, I'm not sure. I think that Title 32 was pretty much wide open. It was a lot. I mean, there's a process to put it together, but I believe it's able to get us more funding in the long run. But that's a pretty ignorant statement. I'm letting you know that that's my impression from the conversations I've had previously.
Okay, Peter, we'll ask you that question after George has had a chance to weigh in, please. Where were you?
I think I'm pretty much in keeping with a lot of the comments in the room. I'm pretty equally dim on the ESG ID and either version of the IGA. And that really comes down to me just about the simplicity of governance. I just a Title 32 dedicated board, one mission, all the authority, right? All the consequences. That's, the reasons that are differ a little bit. The reason I'm dim on the ESG ID, in spite of the fact that if we were prioritizing financial efficiency over sort of appropriate distribution of power, we would choose that because I think that's the most financially efficient. The county has an HR department, it has a finance department, et cetera. For democracies, adequate distribution of power matters. I just can't wrap my head around advocating for a system that has a third of its board not receiving services back on. Just, I got my head on that. The IGA, is more just, I don't see it as functional, I think. I mean, I've been saying this the whole time, and my opinion that, it's not adequately responsive to changing conditions, concerns by various people, because it takes so much to turn the ship when you've got 5 jurisdictions involved. And for that reason, I think that the Title 32 is the thing that likely to be the thing that I could most easily be enthusiastic about, walk out of here saying, yeah, we made a difference here and we built something that works.
So just so I'm understanding, you're interested in the governance structure and the dedication of the Title 32 special district is really around the ability to respond to.
To respond to changing needs,
Yeah.
perspectives, changing conditions.
More responsive.
Yeah.
So hold your thought, Kelly.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time.
Jonathan, I want to weigh in too with respect to what I've heard from the commissioners.
Yeah, we're gonna have a bunch of folks, everybody's gonna get a word on this.
One thing I thought that I meant to mention earlier was also that the thing I liked about Title 32, I mean, it's a board, and it's like the board that's there now. What happens right now is that the funding is, the towns agree to pay so much money and they get it, so they can, wherever they can get it, and they contribute it. So, and it leads to the idea that, it's almost like soft money. It's like, what the city giveth, the city can take us away, and that kind of a thing. And Jeremy hit on something a while ago that was actually kind of, I don't think it was a misstatement, but when he said, people have never had to pay, they've never had any place that they paid for fire protection. Well, they have paid for fire protection. They've paid all these taxes. They paid on the mill levy, but they've also paid in with their own sales taxes, in addition to their sales taxes. Also with their own property taxes, they've gone into the city's funds. And the city then takes that general fund and they take some money out of the general fund and they contribute. It's not a dedicated fire tax or anything. So the reality is that the people here are paying. That needs to be known. The thing I like about Title 32 is it is for one thing. And that's what they're paying for. And then they get to elect people to administrate that funding to do for that specific purpose. So both the funding and the mission are aligned as one, as opposed to kind of a soft money thing that can always change on the supply side. But I just wanted to, add that.
George, were you finished? I think so. I mean, I could wax philosophical for a long time on this. We've all put a lot of thought into it, but I see very similar kind of governance issues. If the ESGID is doing it, we're always going to rely on 4 municipalities that can choose to contract or not, right? So you're still in a 5 jurisdiction conversation. Actually, a 6 jurisdiction conversation once you want a sales tax increase, because you got to go talk to Evergreen Fire about how they'd use your sales tax and whether they'll support your ballot measure. So I mean, that's just my perspective.
So all my comments have nothing to do with how the fire authority currently performs its job. They're simply about this governance, how the board's established and what we're doing with funding. And whatever we do, I'm sure that you guys will continue to try to do the best job you can with what you got.
So I got Brian and Kelly in the queue, and then Peter, we got a question for you after that. Go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing with respect to the Title 32. Title 32 funds emergency response in total, fire and EMS. As much as I would hate to lose this man from our leadership team, Title 32 helps us fund emergency response across the entire county. And by that, I don't mean just the county organization, the entire county. Any of these other options other than the ESGID means we're going to the voters fighting for money to fight for fire over here. Here's a tax for EMS over here. Aaron and I just talked today. We're going to go to the board this year in budget. We're going to ask for 3 more FTEs, another ambulance, so we can have 3 ambulances on all the time. And we're 2 years out from that tax, not supporting the cost of EMS anymore. So now we're going to have competing tax issues out there to fund fire and EMS, when in reality, both are they're so integral to the bottom line of this county, right? And Title 32 marries them together and goes to the voters and says, how do we want to fund emergency response?
So kind of it's building off of this Title 32 has the focus, has the geographic scope for both fire and EMS and sort of that simplicity of sort of understanding. Please.
I will refrain from commenting about the current fire authority and its ability to make decisions and take care of money and provide service. The current IGA needs to be extended to allow for time to look at details of stuff. There also has to be a new IGA beyond that to allow for the possibility that a Title 32 ballot question does not pass, and you need to be able to keep providing service. If you put all of your eggs in the basket for a Title 32, it might not make it. And it's gonna have to be, you're gonna be, if you combine ambulance, it's gonna have to be, you're gonna need money equivalent to 20 mils or better. And it's gonna be expensive. And maybe even beyond that. So Title 32 down the road, yes, it makes sense. We looked at it in 2003 and agreed, the Fire Authority Board at the time agreed that was the direction to take. And then I can't find what changed their mind, and I don't remember because that was a long time ago. But no matter what, the Fire Authority needs to continue to be viable for at least 4 to 5 years. And that way, if your Title 32 fails, you can still take care of business and then figure out Plan C, what you're gonna do.
I think that was implied by what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
That was, the idea is you continue, you do a modified fire authority until you move to Title 32.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, thanks for that. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious, you asked kind of for us an extension to look into
The current,
things.
the current
More
IGA
things.
expires December 31st.
Yeah.
4 parties to the IGA requesting that to be extended
Mhm.
for 2 more years. Brings up the question, but all 5 parties have to agree to it. That could be done next week without any effort other than getting the signatures around, the new signature document. Fast and easy, and that gives you time to look at the details of a Title 32 and how that goes, and then the funding, which, you know, the 9.5% of sales tax is only going to cover the current deficit spending and what should be a priority on wage increase for existing staff before they all pack up and go away and we have to replace them. So beyond that, you gotta have that time and you have to have that decision to make sure you don't have
A gap in.
a gap in life
Like
service.
you had. So let me see if I can do this, but it looks like there's agreement amongst this group about to set aside the ESGID and the existing status quo and to work on modifying and the IGA in a way that is reflective as you move toward a vision of a Title 32 over with redundancies and contingencies associated with, there's not gonna be lapse of service there. And so I just wanna see if testing that idea with this group, see some heads nodding about, let's put aside the existing status quo. Let's put aside the ESGID for the moment and focus on modifying the existing fire authority as you transition to a Title 32 with the idea that that's going to take a number of years and a bunch of work to figure that. Let me just see if kind of I saw some heads nodding. Show of thumbs where, if that's the proposal, is to, to set aside those two and to focus on a fire authority with the overall long-term intent of moving to a special district. With all, and is that something that this group, then we can sort of think about, well, what are those steps and what do we do to sort of to modify the existing piece and sort of what are those steps toward a special district. But let me just see where this group stands. So thumbs up is I can support that sort of idea, separating or setting aside the status quo, ESGID, moving toward a long-term vision of a special district with a modified fire authority obviously before the end of this year, that makes a transition to that special district. Is that something that from the fire authority board you can support, that you have questions about, or hell no, or just no? So I'd like to see just sort of maybe just take a second to think about that and I know we're not asking you to vote on this. This is just kind of generally speaking, I think I could support that, but lots more discussion to come. Straw poll, thank you. So just kind of where are you all?
Generally speaking, with council buy-in, I think this makes good sense. And I know we don't want to repeat any lapse in the IGA. So I think our council would very much be in favor of extending the IGA. So we don't run into a situation like that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a caveat that whatever modification to the IGA and the fire authority is done in a really expedited way, so that you don't get anywhere near that December 30. I know there's that happening was something that everybody articulated as wanting to make sure we avoid for a variety of reasons. Anything else? Idaho Springs perspective, John, Andy? Okay.
I thought you were gonna do a 1, 2, 3, get your hands.
Oh, yeah. I was kind of wanting to see people's, reaction, but let's just do it by jurisdiction and if is it all right if from the county perspective, I go bring you in last again? Is that all right? How about Georgetown, Nick?
Yeah, well, I think Kelly makes a good point. So, even if you're going towards a modified fire authority, I remember several iterations of the IGA that took a long time to negotiate. So Kelly's got a point about just going ahead and extending the existing IGA just so that everything stays stable. We don't have any lapse. It will take longer than just a week because all of us have to go back to our boards for approval on that. But that gives us breathing time to do a modified IGA and a modified representation structure. Think about other funding ideas, who's going to do which. So I guess sort of
That's a little caveat then.
that's kind of a tiered path forward. And then I would also be in favor of long-term going towards the Title 32. But a lot more planning goes into that. So.
Yeah, so the caveat there is not set aside status quo, but just sort of to re-up so that it gives you space versus trying to modify. And the modifications that I understand that have been proposed have to do with representation and sort of making.
Like an additional funding source. It's a county tax.
Because you're gonna need more money, before you have that title, before a special district, Title 32, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Rick.
I absolutely agree. We need to renew the IGA. I think that's a no-brainer and I would bet renew it and then we can have time to
extend it.
So that it's a no-brainer. Personal opinion. I'm not sure about the Title 32 for Georgetown. I just don't, I hear what everyone says, and I personally think that's a great idea. I just don't know if our board, personally, the amount of discussion we had, there needs a lot more work sessions for us to feel that they feel represented in that point. They love the model. They think it works. It represents Georgetown's interest in the best way possible. So I would say no.
No on what? Just status quo is what?
No, no.
32.
Status quo, yes. Modified fire authority, yes. No to the moving towards the Title 32. So that's my opinion. The way I see the board looks, analyze it from this point.
And that's specifically because the representation that Georgetown has under the fire authority kind of IGA model.
Correct, yes. And since I'm a representative, I can only speak from how I see that they view things.
Yeah.
Although I do hear and agree with the assumptions in the way that the Title 32 can do things from the way that they can make decisions to wholeheartedly capture that money for those things. I do like that. I don't think that Georgetown would go for that.
At the current moment, because, and as I think everybody's talked about, is that there's a lot of work to get to that spot and you need a runway to be able to explore that. And so, but at least at this point in time, that's kind of where you think that that's where your board is.
Yes.
Chris?
Mimicking his comments very much so. We would probably stay more towards the status quo just because we don't see an issue with the fire authority right now, besides maybe a little bit of representation throughout the rest of the county and funding, really. So we would be in favor of signing the IGA tomorrow. I mean, we would be in favor. I think we had a letter out 6 months ago that we would sign the IGA to renew it for that 2 years. So I believe that does need to happen right away, and I wouldn't be against work sessions of learning more about a Title 32 district and what we could do to maybe go that direction, but as of right now, the way the board is seeing and the way that I'm holding up to that, we would definitely be leave it the way it is. It'd be looking for better funding opportunities at this point, because we do like our representation on it, and we believe that we're a smaller community in this, but we are dedicated just like anybody else is.
So, you know, kind of as is or open to modifications, the question about long-term vision and about some of the advantages of a Title 32 in terms of that piece that you want to learn more about that in terms of, but as a sort of, and that could be sort of the next focus. Jeanette, Wendy?
Yeah, ditto. That's kind of.
You're
where we
open, you're open
stand
to Title 32, but you wanna.
to learn about it, but not ready to say that we'd love to move toward it. But yeah, we just need to know more about it. I agree with, yeah, obviously we need better funding, so that's kind of our assumption that status quo doesn't have the additional funding, so yep, get rid of that one. Yep, cross out the ESGID. And then have the other two options, but absolutely renew the IGA. Yeah.
And extend it. And
Yes.
extend it.
Yes.
I heard you, we heard you, Wendy.
What do you mean?
Okay. I also hear fear of the Title 32, so we're gonna have to learn more and do a lot of talking before I can say that they'll accept that.
Wendy, can I ask a question? What do you mean when you say and extend it?
Extend the IGA past December.
Oh, okay.
County commissioners.
I never thought we weren't going to sign an IGA. Because I knew we wouldn't have a Title 32 or an ESGID in place, because I knew we were gonna have to get through this process. So I have no fear about it. Therefore, I don't have a fear about the date. So I don't have a driving, and I'm just gonna be real blunt about it. I don't have this driving paranoia about the world's gonna catch on fire and we're not gonna be able to do anything about it, because we don't sign an IGA next week, because we didn't sign it for the last 2 months and everything continues to operate. And I don't think we're talking about in a modified fire authority coming up with all the new funding models and stuff like that in order to sign the IGA. I think that's something that would be the work of the board under the model, continuing under the fire authority and working with the entity, working with all of our jurisdictions. So I don't I mean, to me, rather than say, tomorrow, let's rubber stamp exactly what we've always done tomorrow and then continue having these conversations. After the 5 meetings that we've had, doesn't feel like progress to me if we can't commit to sit down and add a few members to represent those places we're talking about and talk about any of the other stipulations within the IGA that anybody has an issue with. And I don't think, unless we choose to be combative about it, and that's a choice, I don't think it's that hard to make those few changes to make a better IGA between now and, the early fall. If we're talking about doing something like that within the next month or so, then we can get this month or two, we can get that signed in plenty of time. And to go nowhere near December 31st. So that's my take. And I wish that for those that think we do need to sign the same thing tomorrow that we've had all along, I would suggest that we can probably make some improvements to it and do that within the next month or two and still be in good shape and continuing forward. That's my take. I'd like to see us come out of this with some kind of progress towards that, and then continue to talk about the Title 32 and see if we can't get to that place eventually.
I'm gonna stand behind his comments. So thank you, Randy.
I think I agree with what Randy said. I think it seems, what I'd like to see is us make some decisions and solve some of these problems this year. We've spent a lot of time in these groups. It's been a lot of effort and energy from us, which I think was to ourselves and our constituents is not to take this work and put it on the shelf. So I think the idea that the next steps for this group are digging into what are those modifications to the fire authority and what does a Title 32 look like, is very reasonable. And an outcome that looks like what you described, that I would have a thumbs up. We have an IGA that makes some changes to it, that has written into it a goal and a timeline for Title 32.
We're at 5:55, right?
I appreciate everyone's feedback because it does help. I do agree with Randy as well, and I think it's really important that we would take the energies to spend for the next couple of months of how we can modify this. So I am wholeheartedly behind that. I do have some reservations about adding Title 32 to that mix. I feel like that's absolutely appropriate for next year. And after we get this thing done, then we can spend all year slowly digesting that, making it better. I just feel like the fear is now convoluted because we're not unified then. If we can say we're unified finally to a modified IGA and then put all of our efforts to the next few months, I think we're gonna be in a lot better shape than having to make two different things. And that's my opinion.
I also had an additional comment that I guess I'm maybe applying too broad a definition to modified, because modified could also include discussion of increased financial contribution. And that's where it gets kind of sticky. We're all going into budget sessions. And where are we going to come up with the additional funds? Whereas if we just extended the existing IGA, you know what you're dealing with, rather than postponing. Yes, yes. So I guess if everybody is in agreement that the modifications that we'd be talking about did not include any changes to the financial contributions, I think we could probably go ahead and work on the modified IGA up through and get it done by the end of the year. If the modifications had the potential to include financial contribution, I think it makes it a little bit stickier, which, that's the only reason I'm looking at extending the existing IGA for the interim, and then talking about modifications as a whole could also include increased financial contribution, but that's.
Yeah, that's the challenge, because you're in the red. and you're operating in the
Yep.
red, and you continue to operate in the red. And so that, you know, I thought that's what we had talked about, was that's unacceptable from a management perspective. And so that's, to me, that's a bit of the rub, which is where's the additional funding? If you just do the status quo, where's that gonna come from if there's not openness or at least a consideration of additional financial contributions?
But you also have 3 of the municipalities who have stepped up their game. You've got Idaho Springs that did the full increase right away. And Georgetown is committed to, we started off with a 3rd increase. We'll have another 3rd this year. We're phasing it in. Silver Plume stepped up their game and put through a mill levy. So it's not like our status quo means that the municipalities are stuck. It also, in my book, says the county isn't stuck doing, you know, just what they have been doing. Even if we do go ahead and just extend the existing IGA, it doesn't mean we're stuck financially, because actually 3 of the partners have taken steps to increase the contribution.
Well, I just want to recognize, one, what a productive conversation that you've had today. Hopefully we've gotten out of the starting gate or off the starting line or
The bus has
Out of the
started,
parking
maybe?
lot.
out of the parking lot. I know that there's a torch run tomorrow with the Olympics here. He was running the tour with the torch. But there's enough here to start to think about. There are subsequent meetings about modifying the IGA, what that looks like. We're gonna, you know, sort of over the next number of months, we'll focus on a sort of exploring what the elements of a Title 32 would be. That I know we came into this, when my conversations with a number of you, there was a lot of concerns about the ESGID, setting that aside and figuring out, and I know there's some consternation and some uncertainty about moving toward that vision of a Title 32. We're gonna spend some time kind of thinking about what that looks like. I know Randy's got a map, but focusing on the modifying the IGA and, Laura, additional thoughts? I'm sorry, I just want to respect your time.
Thanks, Lynette. I think you're kind of getting to the same understanding of the group discussion as I was, where it sounds to me like you all are agreeing that, one, you don't want to lapse in service, so there's a lot of interest in, you know, re-signing the current IGA, and it sounds like you're almost agreeing to minor modifications. One of them being, let's keep exploring larger modifications, doing a special 32 district. Another being, why don't we kind of cover some of the bases of the changes in representation on the board now? It seems like there's a lot of that support behind that, and that George's point is something you can get done in this IGA kind of renewal. So I think that's a lot of progress, and I'm excited to keep talking about those minor modifications now to talk, and then putting a modification that says, let's have a larger.
Yeah, I still have another, I'm not agreeing with this. Like, I don't feel like I'm gonna go.
Noted, we're not asking for.
No, hold on, let me finish. The direction that you just painted and what you just painted. I would feel more comfortable if we took a vote and said, yes, I wanna go in that direction. Cause I'm not sensing that.
What I thought I heard just then was, I mean, the 3 things that came out of this were, I mean, I felt some pushback against a commitment to a Title 32 to say that the idea commits the board to achieve a Title 32 by a certain time, because that decision hasn't been made.
Right.
On Title 32. But I think it would be fair to say that a modified IGA could have representation in 2 or 3 places like DLD, St. Mary's, maybe that western end of Floyd Hill or something like that, but whatever that is, whatever's worked out. And then also that it would examine, it would absorb the task of seeking funding increases and getting serious about it in an equitable way throughout the district. And it would also study Title 32 so that we can make an informed decision down the road. And then and it would be tasked with maybe establishing having the results of that Title 32 effort to try to see what it can do and look at all the different and compare those two. What kind of funding increases can happen within the modified fire authority? And what kind of funding increases can happen within the Title 32, and then talk about the other aspects of Title 32, so that we can revisit this conversation within a period of time the next year. Because what I don't want to do, what I'd like to know, what the voices in my head are telling me, I'm listening to everyone, all the voices in my head, is that we just put this thing on the shelf and run out of steam talking about the Title 32, the funding increases. And then I think within the IGA, so those three things are paramount. We're looking for money, we're exploring in Title 32, and we're adding a couple of three seats to respond to these concentrations who are not adequately represented right now. Is that something we can agree to? If we're gonna look at those, we're gonna try to find more money, and we're gonna come back with a study on that or a discussion of it, the results of this effort. We're gonna look at the Title 32 and have a very clear picture about what it can and can't, and what will and won't do to us. And combined with the maps and what the representation would look like, and then come back to this by a specified date. Can it say that?
And I'm saying, I think that it would be more useful for our time to commit to signing the IGA first. Second is to discuss for the next few months, then determining how we're gonna modify that and be very clear. And then next year, we tackle those things that you're saying. That feels to me more useful for the next couple of months so that we don't get distracted on all the other Title 32 things, because we have a limited time and scope, and we should go wholeheartedly into that. And I feel personally that is way more important, and it's doable for us to do, and it's not divided. And I would rather take a vote on that first to see if that passes or fails, then take that vote.
Well, I think you may not have understood me. I wasn't saying that we'll.
I think
do
you
a
have to
Title
say
32
that.
study this year. I just want to clarify that. I'm not asking for that. I'm sorry, but I just want to make sure that somebody isn't objecting to something that I'm not asking for.
Okay.
It's that we would simply state in a couple of lines that we will study a Title 32 within this next specified period of time, which can be the next
Okay.
6 months, the next year, the next whatever.
I got you.
We do the same thing on other funding, and within this, we would add a couple of representatives to.
Where I hear the difference is that signing the existing IGA today or next month versus spend a number of months looking to modify that IGA to improve that. That's where I hear some of, if I'm understanding, and that's okay for tonight. We weren't planning on reaching a full agreement on this. And again, I think this is an impressive discussion that you all had. I just want to recognize that. George, you have the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that we've made a lot of progress and we don't need to stop making progress. We committed to a meeting every 2 weeks. It's a lot of meetings, that's a lot of time, a lot of smart people, right? We can continue to make progress. And I think we've made great progress in the middle of this meeting, and then we all expressed our opinions, and then we all got nervous and started to kind of back into our corners and stuff. And I look forward to coming out of our corners a little bit again.
On the agenda, we had anything, Brian, anything more on the community survey?
No, we'll have more next time. We're gonna meet again this week. I mean, we met once to have a conversation. Either this week or next week, George.
And
We'll have more to report at the next meeting. Before you release everybody, we need to settle on the next date.
I'd like to make one other suggestion for the agenda next meeting, is that we commit to looking at the current IGA with an eye towards, we have to get it renewed at the end of this year, and consider, at least discuss what specific changes might be doable this year.
Yeah,
I think that's fair. I think that shows some progress, good faith. But we may decide to just, renew it as is. I think we've heard a lot from everybody here, and I think that would be time well spent. Time's marching on, I just think we should commit to that on the next meeting.
Yeah. Is that something that we can follow up electronically about this, but maybe homework for you to do that in advance, to come and look at specifically study the IGA, thinking about, what are things that are within your control within this year that would help to improve, that would build off of these meetings themselves. 2 weeks from now is the 7th of August.
I don't have access to my calendar.
Wednesday, the 7th of August.
That's good with me.
I do.
7th of August is the Evergreen budget meeting.
We have a budget open house that night. Yes.
It should already be, but
It's because we didn't have a location until today.
What about the sixth, Tuesday, the sixth at 4 o'clock?
I can't do it.
Empire has an event, National Night Out.
Thursday the eighth.
Thursday's good.
I can't. That's too much time for me.
Works for me.
4 p.m.
4 p.m.
You have a Board of Education meeting at 3:30. I mean, I don't know what's on that agenda, but that's on my calendar. Is that on yours?
3:30.
At 3:30, it looks like it could be Zoom. I mean, you could do it here and then move right into a
It's a Google Meet.
30th, you're saying?
We could invite them
Thursday
here.
meeting.
August 8th,
Usually we go to them, we could invite them here, ask them.
and then we'd start this meeting at 4:30.
That's what we're suggesting.
You don't have.
Going once Thursday versus
Thursday, the eighth at 4:30.
Can we say yes to Thursday and we might need to ask that it be 5 to 7 instead of 4 to 6? Can people live with that?
5 to 7. Could I bet, I always feel, and I know Laura and I talked about this, but I feel like a little short on time. Could we do 5 to 7:30? Is that, just give ourselves just a little bit more time, assuming, Jeremy, that we're off the starting blocks. Olympic references.
For example, we'd like to consider 30 more minutes tonight.
We're already 10 minutes after.
Halfway there.
So I think what that means is that if we determine if we start at 4:30, we'll let John know and then we'll let everybody know. We'll try to make that work, in our own self-interest.
Sounds great. Thursday, the 8th at 4:30 or at 5 or, yeah, 4:30.
7:30 to 7:30 or 4:30.
No, 5 to 7:30.
Let's do 5 to 7.
4:37.
7:30.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
We're gonna want to talk about some of the modified stuff for IGA.
I think.
Yes, ma'am.
Just talk about.
I'm good.
Which barrel
Focus.
is supposed to be on
It is, and I've been emailing him on
Yeah.
address that actually, Rick, I'd say, hey, I'm not hurrying.
You said you're not getting anything from you guys, so.
Let me work with Rick, because I reached out.
And so when is your next meeting?
Our next meeting is.
I'll set it up and, but let's just focus on that. Have any specific.
So I wonder if.
Gonna renew.
Email address on your website.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a matter, are there any,
Sending it to
a reason to make it?
Yeah.
3.1.
Whatever.
Town of Georgetown.us.
We'll pop information out.
Tell me what.
I'll schedule a meeting.
Yeah.
Let's just focus on that right now.
Okay.
Let's try to get something done. Get this, renewed, that'll be, then we got.
Yeah, so what time did you decide on? Going back.
Say again, sorry?
What time did you decide on?